The little black girl told the biker her mom's signal pinged from a sealed room beneath the processing floor. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A little black girl ran into the biker bar, her eyes wide with fear, her hands shaking as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper. The bikers at the counter stopped talking. There was something about the way she looked, scared but determined. She was barely more than 10 years old, her face streaked with tears, her clothes dirty from the run. She rushed toward the man at the front, a tall, broad-shouldered biker named Jake, known for his stern but protective demeanor. "Please, help me," she pleaded, her voice a whisper. "My mom, she's down there, beneath the processing floor." She pointed toward the back of the bar, where the sound of engines and chatter faded, and there was only silence. Jake stood still for a moment, not sure if he heard her correctly. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The little girl took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "My mom's signal pinged. It's coming from a sealed room under the processing floor. I don't know what's happening, but she needs help. Please, I've been trying to get someone to listen." Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The bikers around her exchanged glances, some of them unsure of what to do, others leaning forward with concern. Jake's mind was racing, but his instincts kicked in. "Stay here," he told the girl, his voice firm but kind. "I'll make sure you're safe. Just tell me everything you know." The girl nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't know much, just that they've been keeping her down there for weeks. She keeps sending the signal, but no one has done anything. I don't know who's doing this, but she's trapped. I don't know where else to turn." Jake's heart sank. He didn't know what this little girl had been through, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't about to let her face this alone. With a calm but determined look, he turned to his crew. "Everyone, gather up. We've got a job to do. This little girl's mom is in danger, and we're going to find her." The bikers stood up, nodding silently. They'd seen trouble before, but this was personal. They didn't know what they were walking into, but they knew one thing. They'd stick together, no matter what. Jake gave one last look at the girl, his gaze filled with reassurance. "Don't worry, kid. We've got you. We're coming for your mom." With that, the bikers made their way out of the bar, revving their engines. The sound of roaring Harleys filled the night as they sped off, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As they rode through the dark streets, the weight of the situation settled in. No one knew what they'd find beneath that sealed room. But one thing was certain. This was a ride they would not turn back from. The engines of the Harleys roared to life, echoing through the empty streets like a thunderstorm. Jake, leading the pack, kept his eyes focused on the road ahead. The group of bikers followed in formation, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Behind them, the little girl sat in the back of a truck, her small hands tightly gripping the edge of the seat, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. As the miles passed, the weight of what lay ahead grew heavier. They didn't know exactly what was waiting for them beneath the processing floor, but they knew one thing. They weren't going to stop until they found the girl's mother. The silence of the night was interrupted only by the hum of the motorcycles. Each biker was lost in his or her thoughts, but the mission was clear. They weren't just riding for a child's safety anymore. They were riding to uncover something much bigger, something that had been hidden for far too long. Jake glanced over at Diesel, his second in command, a giant of a man with a no-nonsense attitude. Diesel looked back at him, his face set in a hard line, ready for whatever came next. The two exchanged a silent nod before turning their attention back to the road. The girl's name was Aisha. She had told them everything she knew, but the details were few. Her mother had been working at a local processing facility for years, a place that had always been a bit off. The workers there had a strange, unspoken loyalty to the place, and the higher-ups kept their distance. Aisha had never fully understood why, but her mother had always been protective of her job. Until recently, that is. She started acting strange, Aisha had said, saying things like she didn't feel safe. Then the signal came. That ping. It was so faint, but it was from the room they keep locked up. She's been trying to get out for weeks. Jake had his suspicions. He'd heard rumors about the facility, about things that didn't add up. But he had no idea just how deep the secrets went. The closer they got, the more uneasy he felt. The town was small, quiet, and isolated, with no real law enforcement to speak of. And now, they were heading straight into the heart of it. They reached the outskirts of the town just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The orange glow lit up the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. As they entered the industrial district, the buildings grew taller and more imposing, their steel frames looming like giants. The facility loomed ahead, its massive structure looming in the distance. It was exactly as Aisha had described: cold, sterile, and heavily guarded. "We need a plan," Jake said, his voice steady. "We're not just walking in there and hoping for the best." Diesel nodded. "I'll take a look around. Get the lay of the land." "Good idea," Jake said. "We'll meet back here in 10 minutes. No one moves until we have a plan." The bikers split up, each one heading in a different direction, their leather jackets blending into the shadows. Jake stood by the truck, keeping an eye on Aisha, who was now looking at the facility with wide, fearful eyes. "It's okay, kid," Jake said softly. "We'll get your mom back." Aisha nodded, but her hands trembled as she clutched the piece of paper she had carried with her since the moment she left the facility. It was the only thing she had left of her mother. The others returned shortly, their faces grim. Diesel spoke first. "There's a back entrance. It's guarded, but it's less secure than the front." "That's our way in," Jake said, his voice low but determined. "We move fast and quiet. No one gets hurt unless we have no choice." The plan was set. The group would sneak in through the back, bypassing the main gates and the guards. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was their best shot. The bikers mounted their bikes once again, the engines roaring as they sped toward the facility's rear entrance. They had no time to waste. The fate of Aisha's mother, and the mystery of what was really going on behind those sealed doors, was hanging in the balance. As they approached the building, Jake's heart pounded in his chest. They were about to cross a line they couldn't come back from. But for Aisha, and for the truth, they had no choice. The bikers moved swiftly, their boots heavy on the ground as they made their way toward the rear entrance of the processing facility. Jake led the way, keeping a sharp eye on the surroundings, while the others followed in formation, their faces hard and focused. The back entrance was just as Diesel had described, heavily guarded, but with a small gap in security they could exploit. The plan was simple: move quickly, disable the guards if necessary, and get inside without drawing attention. The sound of the motorcycles had faded, replaced by the quiet rustle of the wind in the trees. Everything felt eerily still. Jake's heart raced, but his mind was clear. This wasn't his first high-stakes mission, but something about this felt different. He was doing this for a child, for a mother, and for something far bigger than all of them combined. They reached the rear door, a massive steel structure that seemed out of place in the otherwise quiet industrial complex. Diesel moved to the side, carefully checking the perimeter. "One guard on the left, another by the door," he whispered. "They don't look too sharp, but we need to move fast." Jake nodded. "Get the first one, I'll handle the second. Everyone, keep it quiet." The plan was set. The bikers moved as one. Diesel, with his size and strength, silently approached the first guard, taking him out without a sound. Jake followed suit, stepping lightly toward the second guard, who was distracted by something on his radio. In one swift motion, Jake knocked the man out, dragging him behind a large metal bin to keep him out of sight. The others moved quickly, securing the perimeter and making sure no one else was around. The back door creaked open slowly, the metal groaning as it revealed a dark, dimly lit hallway leading deep into the building. A faint odor of chemicals and oil lingered in the air. It was the kind of smell that made Jake's stomach churn, but there was no time to dwell on it. "Let's move," he whispered, signaling to the group. The bikers filed into the building, their footsteps muffled on the concrete floor. They moved cautiously, the silence of the facility pressing in on them. The further they went, the more the building seemed to close in around them. It was as though they were walking into the heart of something dark and hidden. The air grew colder, and the smell more pungent. They reached a large metal door at the end of the hall, its surface scratched and worn. Aisha had been clear. Her mother was in a room beneath this floor, sealed off from the rest of the building. Jake stepped forward and tested the door. It was locked, but not securely. He pulled a small device from his pocket and quickly got to work on the lock. Hurry, Aisha's voice echoed in his mind. They can't take much more. The lock clicked open. Jake pushed the door slightly, just enough to peek inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. The room was small, dimly lit by a single overhead light. It was filled with filing cabinets, wires, and equipment that looked out of place in a facility meant for processing. But it wasn't the equipment that caught Jake's attention. It was the figure in the far corner of the room. A woman, slumped over, her body weak and frail. Her face was pale, her hair matted to her head, but Jake immediately recognized her. It was Aisha's mother. She was alive, but barely. Jake felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a fight for justice. He motioned for the others to move in. Get her out of here, Jake ordered. Diesel and Wrench moved toward the woman, carefully lifting her from the ground. Aisha's mother was no longer the woman who had been strong and proud, but a shadow of herself, broken by whatever had happened to her in this place. Is she all right? Aisha asked, her voice trembling. She will be, Jake said, his voice firm, but with a touch of compassion. He knew they had to get out of there quickly, but they couldn't leave her like this. As they carefully carried Aisha's mother out of the room, they encountered another obstacle. 2 more guards standing in the hallway, their eyes wide in shock as they saw the bikers and the woman in their arms. Without hesitation, Jake and Diesel lunged forward, taking them down swiftly and silently. The tension in the air thickened as they made their way back toward the exit. Jake could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. This was just the beginning. They had broken into the facility, found Aisha's mother, but there was still so much left to uncover. As they reached the back door, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. It was clear that the authorities were on their way, but Jake wasn't worried. They had a head start, and they had something far more important now, answers. The bikers revved their engines as they quickly loaded Aisha's mother into the back of a truck. We've got to move fast, Jake said. We don't know who's behind this, but we're going to find out. With that, they sped off into the night, the sound of their engines blending with the distant sirens. The engines of the Harleys roared as the bikers sped down the empty highway, the weight of their mission heavy in the air. Aisha's mother, barely conscious, was safely tucked in the back of a truck, her weak body shivering under the blankets that Jake had thrown over her. The girl sat beside her, her hands still trembling but her eyes filled with a flicker of hope. It had been a long ride, but the journey was far from over. As the bikers rode, their thoughts were consumed by the questions that had been left unanswered at the processing facility. Who was behind this? What was going on there? The answers were out of reach, but Jake knew one thing. He wasn't stopping until he had them. As the night wore on, they made their way to a remote cabin on the outskirts of town, away from the prying eyes of law enforcement and whoever else might be looking for them. The cabin had been a safe house for the club for years, a place to lay low and regroup when things got tough. They pulled in, the headlights cutting through the darkened trees, the shadows of the bikers and their motorcycles blending into the night. Jake stopped in front of the cabin, glancing over at Aisha, who had been silent for the entire ride. She was staring out the window, her eyes unfocused, lost in thought. We're here, Jake said softly, his voice filled with reassurance. You're safe now. Aisha didn't respond at first, but after a few moments, she turned toward him, her eyes wide. What happens next? She asked, her voice small. Jake paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Next, we figure out who did this to your mom. We find the truth, and we make sure no one else gets hurt. Aisha nodded, her face determined. I want to help, she said. Jake smiled at her, a small but genuine smile. You've already helped more than you know. Now, we just need to get your mom back on her feet. The bikers unloaded from the trucks, and Diesel and Wrench moved Aisha's mother inside the cabin. They laid her down on a makeshift bed and began tending to her, checking her vitals and making sure she was stable. The rest of the group gathered around the large wooden table in the center of the cabin, the mood serious, the weight of their next move hanging in the air. We've got to know what we're dealing with, Jake said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We can't just go in blindly again. Whoever is behind this has resources, and they'll do anything to keep us from the truth. We know they're connected to the facility, Diesel said, his voice rough from the ride. But who exactly is behind it? That's the real question. We need to hit them where it hurts, Jake replied, his mind already working through the plan. The information we need is in that facility. We've got to find a way to get it, no matter the cost. The group fell silent for a moment, the enormity of the situation sinking in. They had no clear path ahead, just the knowledge that they were standing on the edge of something far darker than they had anticipated. What about the signal? Wrench asked, breaking the silence. Aisha said her mom was sending a signal from beneath the floor. We can't ignore that. Jake nodded. Right. That signal is our lead. We need to figure out how to trace it, how to use it to our advantage. The team began discussing their next steps, each member contributing their knowledge and ideas. The cabin was filled with the sound of their voices, but the tension never lifted. They were all aware that they were now part of something bigger than they had imagined. This wasn't just about saving Aisha's mom. It was about uncovering a network of power and corruption that had been hidden for far too long. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, as if urging them forward, pushing them toward the truth. They were running out of time. The bikers knew the facility wasn't done with them yet. It had secrets buried deep, and they would stop at nothing to protect those secrets. But Jake wasn't afraid. He had made a promise, to Aisha's father, to the little girl sitting across the room, and to himself. They would get to the bottom of this. They would expose the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, no matter the cost. We're not backing down, Jake said, his voice strong. We've come this far, and we're going all the way. The bikers stood tall, ready for the next phase of the mission. They weren't just fighting for one life, they were fighting for the truth. And they would stop at nothing to make sure it was revealed. The plan was set, and the bikers knew the next move was crucial. Jake stood by the cabin's window, looking out into the vast, empty wilderness. It was quiet, too quiet. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant howl of an animal echoed through the hills. But inside, there was no peace. Aisha's mother was resting, the doctors in the group doing their best to stabilize her. But she was weak, her body ravaged by whatever she had endured in the facility. Jake had seen this kind of thing before. People broken by the system, by those in power, and it made his blood boil. He wasn't going to let it stand. Not now. Not after what they had uncovered. We've got to hit them hard, Diesel said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the situation. We can't just waltz back in there, guns blazing. We need information, and we need it now. Jake nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. There was something off about the processing facility. It wasn't just a place where people worked. It felt like a cover for something darker, something that had been hidden away for far too long. I've got a contact who might know more, Jake said, his voice low. He used to work there? Left a few years ago when things started going south. I'll reach out to him. The bikers nodded in agreement, understanding that this wasn't just about rescuing Aisha's mother anymore. It was about exposing what was happening behind closed doors, about taking down the people who thought they could get away with it. As Jake pulled out his phone and dialed the number, the others started preparing. Some checked their gear, others went over the plan again. Time was running out. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The phone rang, then went to voicemail. Jake cursed under his breath, but he wasn't deterred. He left a message, telling the contact he needed answers, fast. If he doesn't call back soon, we'll have to make a move without him, Jake said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. But it's worth a shot. The silence in the room was broken by a soft cough. Aisha stood in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the dim light outside. Her eyes were still red from crying, but there was a newfound determination in her expression. Is she going to be okay? Aisha asked quietly, her voice cracking. Jake turned to her and smiled, a comforting gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. She's strong, he said. She'll make it through. We just have to be ready for whatever comes next. Aisha nodded, but there was something in her gaze that told Jake she knew the truth. The truth was that they weren't just fighting for her mother. They were fighting for something much bigger, something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. As the hours passed, the tension in the cabin grew. The bikers waited for the call, their nerves on edge, but there was no word from the contact. The air was thick with anticipation, and Jake's mind raced. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. They couldn't afford to wait much longer. They had already been in the facility once, but they had barely scratched the surface. There were secrets there, dark secrets, and the bikers were determined to uncover them. It wasn't just about saving Aisha's mother anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had gone unchecked for far too long. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket, and his heart skipped a beat. It was a message from the contact. "I know where the files are hidden," the message read. "Meet me at the old warehouse behind the plant. Midnight. Don't bring anyone." Jake's grip tightened around the phone as he read the message. It was a lead. A good one. He quickly relayed the information to the others. "We've got a location. The old warehouse behind the plant. Midnight. It's our shot." The bikers quickly packed up their gear, the mood shifting from tense anticipation to focused determination. They had a plan, and they were going to follow through, no matter what it took. As they prepared to leave, Jake pulled Aisha aside. "I need you to stay here," he said softly. "It's too dangerous for you to come with us." Aisha's face fell, but she understood. She had already seen too much. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Just bring her back, please." Jake nodded, giving her a reassuring smile before turning to the others. They were ready. The time had come to find the truth, and to take down whoever was behind the twisted web that had ensnared Aisha's family. They weren't just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting for justice. And they weren't going to stop until they had it. With engines roaring and determination in their hearts, the bikers rode off into the night, their mission clear. The old warehouse behind the plant was waiting for them, and they would stop at nothing to uncover the secrets hidden within. The bikers pulled up to the old warehouse behind the processing plant just as the clock struck midnight. The night air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath their boots seemed to vibrate with the weight of what was to come. Jake glanced over at Diesel, who was already scanning the area with his sharp eyes. The warehouse was a massive, decrepit structure, windows boarded up, its metal doors rusted. With age, there was no sign of life, but the place felt alive with secrets. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. The message from the contact was short and to the point. "Come alone. Bring no weapons." It was strange, no weapons? They were bikers. They lived by the code of carrying whatever they needed to survive. But Jake knew this was their only shot. They couldn't afford to spook whoever had the answers. He turned to the crew. "Stay out of sight. I'll go in first. If anything goes wrong, you'll hear from me." Diesel raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He knew better than to argue with Jake when he was focused. The group nodded and spread out, each biker disappearing into the shadows. Jake approached the front of the warehouse cautiously. The dim light from the street lamps barely illuminated the area, and the silence felt suffocating. He reached the entrance, his breath steady. He knocked twice, then waited. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, with a dark jacket and a cap pulled low over his eyes, hiding most of his face. His eyes, though, were cold, calculating. "You're late," the man said in a low voice. Jake didn't respond. He just stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with a heavy thud. The interior of the warehouse was vast and eerily empty, save for piles of crates and old machinery scattered across the floor. The man led him deeper into the warehouse, past rows of unused equipment and dark corners. The only sound was their footsteps echoing in the silence. Finally, they reached a small room at the back, its door shut tight. The man opened it without a word and stepped aside. Jake walked in, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Inside was a table, and sitting at it was a woman, her face obscured by shadows. She looked up as Jake entered, her expression unreadable. "I take it you're Jake," she said, her voice smooth, with an accent that was hard to place. "I have the answers you're looking for." Jake didn't sit down. He crossed his arms and waited for her to continue. The woman smiled faintly. "You think you're here for your friend's daughter, don't you? But you're in way over your head. This goes deeper than you realize." Jake's jaw clenched. "Where is she?" he demanded. The woman held up a hand, signaling for him to wait. "The girl's mother isn't the only one they've been keeping here. You're not the first to come looking, and you won't be the last." Jake stepped forward. "What do you mean? Who else is here?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She sat back, folding her arms as if sizing him up. "There are people who've been kept here for far longer than your friend's wife. We're talking about a network that goes beyond this warehouse. This is just the tip of the iceberg." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just some isolated incident. It was part of something much bigger, a well-oiled machine that had been operating under the radar for years. The woman leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. They've been using the facility for years to run experiments, testing people, using them as subjects. Your friend's wife was one of them. But she was also a whistleblower. She tried to expose it, and they locked her up. Jake's mind was racing. Everything was coming together in a twisted puzzle he wasn't sure he could solve. Why help us now, he asked. What's in it for you? The woman's smile faded, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something human behind her cold demeanor. Because I'm done, she said quietly. I've been working with them for too long, and I can't pretend anymore. I want out. But they'll never let me go unless I help bring them down. She stood up and walked over to a stack of crates, pulling out a small hard drive. This is everything. Every file, every document, every transaction. It's all on here. If you want to take them down, you need this. Jake took the hard drive, feeling its weight in his hand. This is just the beginning, she said. But you'll need more than just the information on this drive. You'll need allies. People who are willing to fight for what's right. Jake didn't hesitate. I have all the allies I need, he said. He knew what had to be done. He was going to bring this whole thing down, no matter what. He looked at the woman one last time. Get out while you can, he told her. She nodded, her face hardening again. You won't be the only one trying to stop them. Good luck. With that, Jake turned and walked out of the room, the hard drive clutched tightly in his hand. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let anyone stand in his way. As he stepped back into the darkness of the warehouse, the sound of his boots echoed in the vast space, a reminder that this fight was far from over. The bikers would do whatever it took to stop the monsters hiding in the shadows. Jake returned to the cabin with the hard drive in hand, his mind racing with everything the woman had told him. The air inside the cabin was thick with anticipation, the bikers standing by, waiting for their next orders. Jake stepped inside and shut the door behind him, his eyes scanning the room, landing first on Aisha, who had been anxiously pacing. She stopped and looked at him, her face etched with concern. Did you get it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake held up the hard drive, and for a moment, Aisha's eyes brightened with hope. But Jake didn't smile. We've got it, he said, his voice steady, but with a seriousness that made the room feel even heavier. But this is just the beginning. There's a lot more to this than we thought. The bikers gathered around, the weight of Jake's words sinking in. Diesel crossed his arms, his expression grim. What did she tell you? Jake leaned against the wall, his eyes locking with Diesel's. The facility isn't just a processing plant. It's a cover for something bigger, something darker. They've been using it for years to run experiments on people, testing them, controlling them. Aisha's mom was one of the whistleblowers, but they silenced her. Now they're after anyone who tries to expose them. The room went silent as the implications of Jake's words hit home. Wrench, the youngest of the crew, spoke up. So what's next? We just go back in there and start taking down everyone who's involved. Jake shook his head. No, we need more than just this hard drive. We need to get to the heart of this. Who's funding it? Who's running it? And who's trying to cover it up? And we need to do it without making ourselves targets. Diesel stepped forward. We're not going to do this alone. We'll need backup, people who can help us dig into the company's background. We need to find out who's really behind all this. I know a few people, Jake said, his voice quieter now, as if the weight of the situation was starting to settle on him. But it's going to take time, and time is something we don't have. What about the plant? Diesel pressed. We can't just sit on this. We need to go back and shut it down for good. Jake nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. We will, but not yet. We need to be smart about this. If we go in guns blazing, they'll just bury the evidence and disappear. No, we're going to expose everything, but we need to make sure we have everything we need to bring them down for good. Wrench, still processing everything, asked, how do we do that? We follow the paper trail, Jake replied, his mind already working out the details. This hard drive is a start. We find the information on who's been paying for the experiments, who's behind the whole operation. If we can connect the dots, we can expose them. But we need to be careful. They'll know we're coming. We can't afford to make any mistakes. Aisha, who had been silent until now, spoke up. So, you're saying that they're not just doing this in the plant? They're involved with people outside the plant, too? Jake met her gaze. Exactly. It's bigger than the facility. The plant is just one piece of the puzzle. Whoever's pulling the strings is far more dangerous than anyone we've encountered so far. The room was quiet for a moment, each biker lost in their own thoughts, the enormity of what they were about to undertake settling over them. Diesel broke the silence. You know we're all in, right? Whatever it takes. Jake nodded, grateful for the loyalty of the group. They had come this far together, and they weren't about to stop now. I know, Jake said quietly. We'll do this together. We're not backing down. Aisha stood up, her eyes determined. I want to help. I need to do something. Jake glanced at her, concern flickering in his eyes. It's not safe, Aisha. You've already done more than enough. But Aisha shook her head. No, I can't just sit here. I have to do something. I won't be the reason you guys fail. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew she was stubborn, but he also knew that her heart was in the right place. All right, he said after a moment, but you stay close. And if anything goes wrong, you stay out of sight. Understood. Aisha nodded, her resolve clear. Understood. Jake turned to the bikers. We'll need to move fast. We have the hard drive, but we need more intel. Let's hit the ground running tomorrow. We don't have time to waste. The group nodded in agreement, each biker silently acknowledging the gravity of what they were about to do. The next step would be risky, but they had no choice. Jake's mind raced with the plan he was forming. They would track down the people behind the experiments, dig into the company's background, and find the money trail that led to the dark heart of this operation. They would expose everything, take down whoever was in charge, and bring justice to those who had been wronged. It was the only way to put an end to this nightmare. And Jake wasn't about to let anyone stand in their way. The next day, the bikers gathered at the cabin, the mood tense but focused. The time for planning was over. They had the hard drive, they had the information, and now it was time to put everything into action. Jake sat at the table, his eyes fixed on the screen of his laptop as he combed through the files on the hard drive. Aisha sat quietly across from him, watching him work, her hands clenched in her lap. Diesel, Wrench, and the rest of the crew stood nearby, ready to move at a moment's notice. The room was heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. Jake had spent hours overnight reviewing the data, and now, after scanning through the files, he had connected the dots. This is bigger than I thought, Jake muttered to himself, his voice low. These people, they've been running a covert operation for years. Diesel leaned over, peering at the screen. What kind of operation are we talking about? Jake didn't look up as he spoke. It's a network. Companies, politicians, law enforcement. They've all been involved in funding these experiments, covering up what's really been going on. These people thought they could just keep this under wraps forever. Wrench, who had been pacing the room, stopped and turned toward Jake. So what now? We go public with this? Jake shook his head. No, not yet. We need to hit them where it hurts. We need to follow the money and figure out who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. The information on this drive is just the tip of the iceberg. Jake took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the weight of the decision ahead of him. The next step is risky, he said. We need to infiltrate the corporation's headquarters. There's a central server room there that holds all the data we need, every contract, every transaction. If we get access to that, we can expose everyone involved. The room went silent, each biker processing the plan. Aisha looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. How do we get in? Jake stood up, walking toward the window. I've got a contact inside, he said, his tone hard. We'll use him to get through the front. Once we're inside, we find the server room and copy everything. We get the evidence, and we get out. Fast. Diesel gave him a sharp nod. And what about security? Jake's jaw tightened. The place is heavily guarded, but there's a blind spot in their security system. We're going to take advantage of that. We'll go in when they're least expecting it. The bikers exchanged looks, each one knowing the risks involved. They were going up against a powerful and dangerous organization. But none of them hesitated. They had come this far, and they weren't about to back down now. Aisha stood, determination in her eyes. I'm coming with you. Jake turned, surprised by the strength in her voice. No, Aisha. It's too dangerous. But she shook her head. I'm not sitting here while you risk everything. I need to know the truth, just like you. Jake looked at her for a long moment. He knew she wasn't going to back down. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. All right, but you stay close. And if anything goes wrong, you stay out of sight. Understood. Aisha nodded, her face set. Understood. Jake turned to the rest of the crew. All right, let's move out. We don't have much time. They quickly gathered their gear, the bikers preparing for the mission ahead. The plan was dangerous, but it was their only shot at bringing down the people behind the experiments. Jake's mind was focused as he ran through the details in his head. Infiltrating the headquarters wasn't going to be easy, but they had no choice. They couldn't let the opportunity slip away. The bikers mounted their bikes, the engines roaring to life as they sped off toward the corporate headquarters. As they made their way through the city, the streets felt eerily quiet. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was stronger than ever. This was it, the final step. They were going to take down the people who had been hurting so many for so long. The headquarters loomed ahead, a massive building of steel and glass that stood like a fortress. As they approached, Jake's contact sent them a message. "I've got you covered. The security system is down. You've got a window. Move fast." Jake gave a sharp nod, and the bikers split off, each one taking their assigned position. They couldn't afford to be sloppy. One mistake, and it was all over. Jake's pulse quickened as he moved toward the building, his hand gripping the weapon at his side. This was no longer just about rescuing Aisha's mother. It was about taking down an entire network of corruption and power. The bikers would stop at nothing to bring the truth to light. As they entered the building, the weight of their mission pressed down on them, but they moved with purpose. The time for hesitation was over. Now was the time for action. They were going to make sure that no one would ever forget what happened here. The bikers moved swiftly through the back entrance of the corporate headquarters, their boots muffled by the thick carpet as they made their way through the dark, empty hallways. Jake led the group, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Diesel was right behind him, with Wrench and the others close by. Aisha stayed near Jake, determined to help, though Jake could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. But she was strong, and he knew she needed to see this through. "Stay alert," Jake whispered to the crew. "We don't know how much time we have before they figure out we're here." They moved quickly but quietly, passing locked doors and security stations. Jake's mind was racing. This was it. The information they needed was just ahead. In the building's data center, a secure room filled with servers that held the answers to everything they had been fighting for. The whole operation was built on secrecy, and they were about to rip it apart. They reached the end of the hallway and stopped in front of a heavy steel door, the access control panel blinking green. Jake's contact had disabled the security system, but there was still the matter of getting inside. Jake approached the panel and typed in a code that had been sent to him. The door clicked, and with a loud hiss, it opened. They entered the room, and Jake felt the air shift. The cool hum of the servers filled the space, and the room was bathed in the blue glow of countless screens. Rows of servers stretched out before them, the heart of the company's hidden operations. Jake could already hear the faint sound of someone approaching, their footsteps echoing in the distance. "We've got a few minutes," Jake said, already moving to the terminal at the center of the room. He pulled the hard drive from his pocket and plugged it into the system. "Let's get this data." As the files began to transfer, Jake's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of voices in the hallway. The security team was coming, and they were getting closer. "We need to hurry," Diesel whispered. Jake's fingers flew over the keyboard as the data transfer continued, the screen flashing rapidly as he navigated through the system. Each file that appeared confirmed what they had suspected. It was all here, the experiments, the funding, the names of those involved. They were on the verge of exposing everything. But then, the system froze. "Damn it," Jake muttered under his breath. "It's encrypted." Wrench stepped forward, glancing at the screen. "I can crack it," he said confidently, his eyes already scanning the lines of code. Jake didn't hesitate. "Do it." Wrench got to work, his fingers moving quickly as he bypassed security measures and decrypted the files. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Jake could feel the pressure mounting. They didn't have much time. Aisha was watching him closely, her face pale but determined. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "We're almost there," Wrench said, his voice tense. The seconds felt like hours as Jake glanced at the door, the sound of approaching footsteps growing more distinct. Then, with a soft click, the files were unlocked, and the information they needed appeared on the screen. Jake exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Got it," he said, grabbing the data off the system. "We're done here. Let's go." Just as they were about to turn and leave, the door to the server room slammed open, and a group of security guards stormed in, their guns drawn. Jake's heart raced, and he quickly scanned the room for an escape route. "Move now," he shouted. The bikers reacted instantly, grabbing Aisha's mother and making a break for the back exit. Jake and Diesel were the first to move, rushing toward the emergency exit door. The guards shouted after them, but the bikers were already halfway down the hallway, sprinting for their lives. They reached the exit, and Jake pushed the door open, the cold night air hitting him like a slap to the face. The sound of the motorcycle's engines filled the night as the bikers scrambled to mount their bikes. Aisha's mother was safely secured in the back of a truck, and the bikers were all in position. Jake jumped onto his bike, his heart still pounding from the close call. "Go!" he yelled, and the engines roared to life. The group sped off into the night, the sound of the motorcycles growing fainter as they put more distance between themselves and the building. Behind them, the headquarters stood like a dark giant, its secrets exposed, its walls no longer protecting the people who had thought they were untouchable. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Jake knew there was still much more to uncover, and there were still people who needed to be held accountable. The night was far from over, and the road ahead was filled with danger. But they had made it this far, and they weren't stopping now. As the bikers disappeared into the darkness, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had just done. They had the evidence, but now they had to use it. The truth had been exposed, but the fight was just beginning. The bikers rode hard through the night, the wind cutting through the air, their hearts racing with adrenaline. The plan had gone off without a hitch, but Jake knew this was far from over. They had the evidence now, the files that could expose the entire operation, but the real fight was just beginning. The mission wasn't just about rescuing Aisha's mother anymore. It was about bringing down a powerful network of corruption, a force that had been operating under the radar for years. Jake could feel the weight of what they had uncovered. It wasn't just a few bad actors. It was a system, a whole ecosystem built on secrecy and power, and they were about to tear it apart. The road stretched out before them, the headlights of their motorcycles illuminating the darkened path. Aisha sat in the back of the truck with her mother, her hands still trembling, but a sense of determination settling in her chest. She had seen too much to turn back now. She had come face to face with the darkness, but now she knew that her family's pain had not been in vain. They were going to make sure the truth came to light. Jake glanced over his shoulder at her, then back to the road ahead. Diesel was riding in front, his massive form cutting through the wind like a force of nature. The rest of the crew was close behind, moving as one, every biker focused and ready for whatever came next. They were in this together, and nothing was going to stop them. As they approached their safe house, Jake's mind was already running through the next steps. They had to get the information out, but they couldn't just dump it and hope for the best. This was a war, and they needed to strategize. They had to get the data to the right people, the ones who could act fast and expose the network for good. But they also had to be careful. Whoever was behind this had deep connections, and they weren't going to let the truth slip out without a fight. Jake pulled up to the safe house, the bikers circling around the building and parking their bikes. The engines were silenced, and for a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. The crew dismounted, their faces determined but tired from the long night. Aisha's mother was still in the back of the truck, her body weak but stable. Jake approached the truck, his voice calm but firm. "We need to get her inside and take care of her. Diesel, wrench, get her settled in." The two bikers moved quickly, lifting Aisha's mother carefully and carrying her inside. Jake watched them go, then turned to the rest of the group. "We've got work to do." The bikers made their way inside, gathering around the table. The hard drive was placed in front of Jake, and he plugged it into a laptop. The screen flickered to life, and he began scrolling through the files again, this time with a renewed sense of urgency. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something they hadn't anticipated. Aisha stood by the door, watching Jake as he worked. She knew the stakes now, and she wasn't going to stand on the sidelines. She had to be a part of this. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady. Jake looked up, his expression hardening. "We're going to release the files, but we need to make sure we're prepared for what happens next. Once this information goes public, it's going to get ugly. The people behind this won't just sit back and let us take them down." Diesel nodded. "We'll make sure we're ready. We've got your back." Jake glanced around the room at the crew. These were his brothers and sisters, the ones who had stood by him through thick and thin. They had taken down enemies before, but this was different. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. The bikers spent the next few hours going over the plan. They had to get the data into the right hands, but they also had to cover their tracks. They couldn't let anyone trace the information back to them. The plan was simple but risky. They would contact a few trusted journalists, leak the information, and let the world know what had been happening in the shadows. The hard drive had everything: names, contracts, financial backers. It was all there, a roadmap to the heart of the operation. But getting it out wasn't going to be easy. The bikers weren't afraid of a fight, but they knew they were up against a powerful enemy. The next few days would be critical. They would need to stay hidden, stay off the grid, until the world started reacting. Aisha's mother was resting now, her condition stable, but she wasn't out of the woods yet. The bikers knew they couldn't take her back to a hospital. They couldn't risk anyone connecting her to the operation. Jake sat at the table, his eyes focused on the screen, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew this wasn't just about the files. It was about everything that had been done to people like Aisha's mother. It was about everything they had endured, and everything they would do to make sure it stopped. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The tension in the cabin was palpable as Jake and the bikers finalized their plan. The hard drive was secured, but they knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The data was explosive, enough to take down the entire operation, but they couldn't just send it off without making sure they were ready for the consequences. Aisha's mother was still recovering, and though she was stable, her ordeal was far from over. Jake walked over to the window and gazed out into the night, his mind working through every possible scenario. He knew that whoever was behind the operation wouldn't let this go without a fight. It wasn't just about saving one woman. It was about exposing an entire web of corruption and power, and that wasn't going to come without retaliation. Aisha stood by the door, her eyes following him. She had been quiet since the plan was set into motion, her face still pale from the shock of everything that had happened. But Jake could see it in her eyes, the same fire that had been there when she first walked into the biker bar. She was ready to do whatever it took to see this through. "Jake," Aisha said, her voice soft but firm. "What's the next move?" Jake turned to face her, taking a deep breath. "We get the information out," he said, "but we do it carefully. I've got a contact at a major news outlet. We'll leak the data to them, but we need to stay off the radar while they dig into it. The last thing we want is to get caught up in this mess." Diesel stepped forward, his expression hard. "How do we know they won't trace it back to us?" "We've covered our tracks," Jake replied, nodding. "The files are encrypted, and the contact I'm sending it to is reliable. But we can't sit around waiting for things to blow up. We need to keep moving, stay ahead of them." The plan was simple, but Jake knew it wouldn't be easy. Exposing an operation like this was like pulling a thread on a tightly wound rope. Once it started unraveling, there was no telling where it would lead or who would get hurt in the process. Wrench spoke up from the corner of the room. "I can help with the backup. We'll make sure the data stays safe while you're in contact with your people." Jake gave a small nod of appreciation. "I know you will. We've got the advantage, but we need to stay focused. Whoever is behind this, they have resources. We can't underestimate them." Aisha, who had been standing silently, suddenly spoke up. "What about the plant? We can't just leave it there, can we?" Jake turned toward her, surprised by her question. "What do you mean?" She stepped forward, her eyes clear with determination. "We know where it's all happening. We've got the information. If we don't shut it down completely, won't they just try again?" Jake hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always been about taking down the enemy at the source, but Aisha was right. This couldn't just be a one-time exposure. If they didn't shut the operation down at the plant, there was nothing stopping it from continuing. "You're right," Jake said after a long pause. "We need to make sure the plant is shut down for good. We can't let them rebuild it or cover up their tracks. We'll have to hit them hard. This time, there's no turning back." Diesel cracked his knuckles, a small smirk on his face. "When do we go in?" "Tomorrow," Jake said, his voice steady. "We hit the plant at dawn. We'll move fast, disable their operations, and make sure nothing gets left behind." The bikers exchanged looks, each of them ready for the fight ahead. The time for playing it safe was over. They had the evidence. Now, they needed to make sure it couldn't be hidden. The plan was set. As Jake prepared to leave, he turned to Aisha. "You're staying here," he said firmly. She shook her head. "No, I'm coming with you. I've seen what's at stake. I'm not going to sit here and wait." Jake was about to argue, But then he saw the look in her eyes, the same determination that had been there from the beginning. She wasn't going to back down. "All right," Jake said, after a moment of silence. "But you stay close. If anything happens, you get out." "Understood." Aisha nodded. "Understood." As the bikers mounted their bikes and revved their engines, Jake's heart raced. They were about to make a move that would change everything. The next few hours would determine not just their fate, but the fate of everyone who had been affected by the operation. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But Jake knew one thing for sure. They weren't backing down. Not now, not ever. The battle for the truth had just begun, and they were ready for whatever came next. The morning air was cold and crisp as Jake and the bikers made their way toward the plant, the sound of their motorcycles cutting through the silence. Aisha sat behind Jake, her eyes fixed ahead, her grip tight on his waist. She had insisted on coming, and Jake couldn't deny the fire in her eyes, the same determination that had driven her from the moment she walked into the biker bar. They had reached the final stage. Today was the day everything changed. The plant loomed ahead, its towering structure blocking out the morning light. Jake knew that the people behind this operation would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But they had no choice. They couldn't let the truth stay buried any longer. "Stay sharp," Jake said as they approached the plant. "We move fast, hit hard, and make sure they can't cover their tracks." Diesel, Wrench, and the others nodded, their faces set in grim determination. Each of them knew the stakes. This wasn't just about the evidence anymore. It was about ending the cycle of abuse, corruption, and exploitation that had been allowed to continue for so long. They pulled up to the gates of the plant, the guards stationed at the entrance unaware of what was coming. Jake gave the signal, and in an instant, the bikers stormed the gates, using their bikes to ram through the security barriers. The sound of revving engines echoed through the facility as they crashed through, quickly making their way toward the main building. "We've got to find the control room," Jake shouted over the roar of the engines. "Take out the security system and shut this place down." The bikers spread out, each of them knowing exactly what needed to be done. Wrench led the charge, taking out the first set of guards with precision. Diesel and the others cleared the way, knocking out anyone who stood in their path. Aisha stayed close to Jake, her eyes scanning the area, her heart racing with every step. They reached the main building, the doors reinforced with steel. Jake and Diesel approached first, while the rest of the crew kept watch. "This is it," Jake said, his voice low but confident. "Once we're inside, we take down the operation." Diesel gave a nod, and together, they forced the door open. Inside, the plant was a maze of metal and concrete, but they knew where they needed to go. The control room was at the heart of the facility, where the network that ran everything was housed. As they made their way deeper into the building, they could hear the sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. "We're not alone," Wrench called out. "They know we're here." Jake cursed under his breath. "Keep moving. We're not stopping now." They pushed forward, breaking down barriers and knocking out any resistance in their path. The control room was just ahead, and Jake could feel the tension building. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. They reached the door to the control room, and Jake motioned for Diesel to step back. He had a plan, but it would require quick thinking and perfect timing. He pulled a small device from his pocket and attached it to the door's security lock. The device hummed for a moment before the lock clicked open. "We're in," Jake said, his voice steady. Inside the control room, rows of computers blinked with data, and screens displayed live feeds of every corner of the facility. But it wasn't the screens that caught Jake's attention. It was the man standing in front of them. He was tall, wearing a dark suit, and his face was expressionless as he watched the bikers enter. "I knew you'd come," the man said calmly. "You're too late, though. This facility will continue running, no matter what you do." Jake's blood ran cold. This was the one they had been searching for, the mastermind behind it all. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Jake replied, stepping forward. "You're done." The man didn't flinch. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than you could ever understand. You'll never stop us." Jake's jaw clenched. "We already have." He motioned for Diesel to start disabling the computers. The man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You don't know the full extent of what's at stake. People's lives are at risk." Jake turned to face him, his eyes hard. "I know exactly what's at stake. You've been using people like pawns in your game, and now it's over. He turned back to the computer screens, typing rapidly. The data is all here. Every contract, every name, every transaction. You're going down. The man's face twisted with rage, and for a moment, Jake thought he might strike. But then, the sound of sirens cut through the air. The authorities were on their way. Jake had anticipated this, but it didn't make the situation any less dangerous. We've got what we need, he said, turning to his crew. Let's get out of here. They moved quickly, leaving the control room in disarray. Aisha followed close behind, her mother still in the back of the truck, ready to leave the facility once and for all. They weren't done yet. The fight for justice was far from over. But they had won a battle, and that was enough for now. As they made their way out of the building, Jake knew they had to move fast. The truth was out, and they weren't going to stop until everyone responsible paid for their actions. The night was far from over, but the bikers had made their mark, and they weren't backing down. The bikers sped away from the plant, the engines of their motorcycles roaring through the night as the authorities closed in. The streets were a blur, but Jake's mind was clear. They had done it. They had exposed the operation, broken into the heart of the corrupt system, and taken the first step toward dismantling it. Aisha's mother was safe, for now, and the data they had gathered was in the hands of journalists who would make sure the truth was told. But Jake knew the fight wasn't over. The people behind this weren't going to go down easily. As they raced through the darkened streets, the adrenaline from the night's actions began to fade, but the reality of what lay ahead still weighed heavily on Jake's mind. They were far from out of danger. The authorities had been notified, but the network of corruption they had uncovered went deeper than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just about shutting down one plant or arresting a few criminals. This was a powerful system with connections everywhere, and Jake knew it was only a matter of time before they would be coming after them. We've got the evidence, Diesel said, breaking the silence as they rode. But they're not going to let this go without a fight. Jake nodded grimly. I know. This is just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead of us. The bikers turned onto a secluded dirt road that led to a hidden warehouse where they could lay low for the time being. They parked their bikes and made their way inside, the door creaking shut behind them. It was safe for now, but Jake knew it wouldn't be for long. What's the plan now? Wrench asked as the crew gathered around. Jake sat down at the small table, the hard drive in front of him. We lay low. We let the journalists do their job and expose the truth. We keep our heads down until the heat dies down. But we can't stop. Not yet. Aisha sat at the table, her eyes still filled with determination. She had seen her mother suffer, and she wasn't going to let the people who caused that walk away free. I'm not stopping, she said, her voice steady. We've come this far. We've got to finish this. Jake looked at her, the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He knew the fight would be dangerous, and there was no way to predict what would happen next. But he also knew that they couldn't just walk away from this. They had already risked too much. We'll finish this, Jake said, his voice firm. But we need to be smart. We'll stay in the shadows for now. We can't let them track us down. They have resources, and they're not going to stop. Diesel spoke up. I can set up some new contacts, make sure we have the backup we need. We'll stay connected, but out of sight. Jake nodded. Good. We need to stay ahead of them. The bikers spent the next few hours discussing the next phase of the plan. They couldn't stay in hiding forever, and they needed to make sure they were ready when the time came. They were dealing with a powerful enemy, and they needed to be strategic. Aisha's mother was resting in the back room, still weak, but recovering. Jake had made sure she was stable, but they couldn't risk taking her to a hospital. The danger of being found was too high. Jake stood up and walked over to the window, looking out into the night. The storm had passed, but the calm was deceiving. The fight for justice was far from over. The bikers had the evidence, but they knew it wouldn't be enough. They would need to bring down the whole network, root and branch. The people behind the experiments, the corruption, the cover-ups, Jake wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not now, not ever. He turned back to the group, his mind focused. We have one shot at this, Jake said, his voice steady. Once the truth gets out, there's no going back. We'll be in the fight of our lives, but we have to do it. For Aisha's mom, for everyone who's been hurt by this. Diesel, Wrench, and the others nodded. They were ready. They had been through battles before, but this time was different. They were fighting for more than just their own survival. They were fighting for a future where the truth could no longer be hidden, a future where people could no longer be used and discarded by the powerful. Jake turned to Aisha, who had been silent for a moment, her eyes distant. She looked back at him, her voice steady. "I'm in," she said. "Let's finish this." Jake smiled, a small but genuine smile. "We will." The bikers spent the next few weeks laying low, keeping their heads down and waiting for the right moment. The media had started to pick up the story, and the truth was slowly spreading. But the people behind the operation were powerful, and they had no intention of going down without a fight. Jake and his crew weren't done yet. They would continue to fight, continue to expose the truth, no matter what it took. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Jake knew they were ready for it. They had come this far together, and they weren't going to stop until justice was served. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. In these gripping Hell Angels stories, the bikers face unimaginable odds as they uncover a massive conspiracy hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly quiet town. Jake, the leader of the crew, and his gang set out to expose a dangerous operation that has been operating under the radar for years. With a hard drive containing explosive information, they prepare for the battle of their lives. As the story unfolds, the bikers' loyalty to each other is tested, and their quest for justice leads them into dangerous territory. The stakes rise with every passing moment, and the Hell Angels must confront powerful enemies who will stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. These Hell Angels stories reveal the darkness lurking behind the scenes, and as the bikers race against time, they must make life-altering decisions to protect the truth. Follow along as Jake and his crew fight for justice, uncovering shocking truths and battling corrupt forces. The thrill of these Hell Angels stories intensifies as the bikers risk everything to bring down a powerful network that has been exploiting people for far too long. From narrow escapes to intense showdowns, the road ahead is filled with danger and uncertainty. But the bikers are determined to finish what they started. This is one of the most intense and dramatic Hell Angels stories you'll ever hear.